The memory of that day, the day I was betrayed by the one person I had trusted more than anyone, still haunted me in every waking moment. It had been my best friend, someone I had grown up with, someone I believed would always protect me. But in my previous life, she allowed her friends to take everything from me. I still remember the horror of it, how the world seemed to slow down as I realized what was happening. There was no escape, no one to help me. My body was frozen in fear, and yet my mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, even though I knew it was already too late. I had been at her house that night, the night everything changed. It was supposed to be a night of laughter, of simple fun between two friends. But I never suspected that the people she invited over would be the ones who would destroy me. At first it seemed innocent enough, just a few drinks, music, and the usual chatter. But then, everything spiraled out of control. I had trusted her, and yet she sat back and watched as her friends did unspeakable things to me, things that no one should ever have to endure. The worst part? She never stopped them. She stood by, pretending to be unaware, when all the while she knew exactly what was happening. The weight of her betrayal crushed me more than the physical pain. As the chaos unfolded, I saw her face, the face of someone who had once been my closest friend. She didn't look scared. She didn't look sorry. She looked relieved, even satisfied. The people who had done this to me were her friends, people she had chosen over me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She had let it happen. Worse still, she had set it all in motion. The very person I had trusted the most had betrayed me in the worst way possible. In the end, it wasn't just the physical violence that destroyed me. It was the emotional devastation that came with knowing my best friend had not only stood by, but had actively participated in my suffering. I had been left to die alone and broken, in the same place where I had once felt safest. And as I breathed my last breath, I could hear her voice, her calm voice, as she whispered to the others. She was so casual about it, like it was just another thing to get through. She had never once thought about how I felt, never once cared about the trust one had placed in her. But I had no time to process my death. The pain of betrayal consumed me, but it was also the catalyst for my rebirth. I felt my consciousness slip away, but even as I did, a single thought echoed in my mind. I would not let this be the end. I would return, and when I did, I would make sure she paid for everything. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing with certainty: I would take revenge. The betrayal would not define me. The death I had suffered would not be the final chapter of my story. When I was reborn, I would make sure she knew what it meant to betray me. I would make her regret every moment she let me suffer. I had been her friend, and she had chosen to destroy me. But this time in this new life, I would be the one in control. The time for vengeance had come. The world was different when I opened my eyes. I had expected darkness, the cold grip of death to hold me, but instead, I was met with warmth, with life. I could feel the breath in my lungs, the steady beat of my heart. It was as though I had been pulled back from the edge of an abyss, only to find myself in a completely unfamiliar place. I looked around, confused at first, the remnants of my past life swirling around my mind. The faint memories of betrayal, pain, and loss were all too fresh, yet they felt distant as I tried to make sense of the world I was now in. I was no longer the person I had been before, weak, afraid, broken. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something had changed within me. It was as though I had been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite my fate, to fix the wrongs that had been done to me. But with this new life came a heavy burden, the knowledge of my past. The pain of betrayal by my best friend, the people who had allowed my suffering and my death, they were still with me, still raw in my mind, but now I had the power to change things. I was reborn with the one goal in mind: revenge. The first few days were disorienting. I had to learn to navigate this new life. New family, new friends, new surroundings. The faces I saw were unfamiliar, but something about them felt like I had known them forever. Some were strangers, but others were all too familiar. And then there was her, my best friend. She was here in this life just like before. But this time I would not make the same mistake. This time I would not be fooled by her sweet smile, her warm gestures, or her fake kindness. I knew what she had done, and I could feel the rage building inside me as I locked eyes with her. She didn't recognize me yet, not completely, but I would make her remember. I would make her understand exactly who I was, and how I had come back for one thing: to make her pay. The more I observed her, the more I understood how deeply I had been betrayed in my previous life. She wasn't the innocent friend I had believed her to be. In this life, she had already begun to show signs of the same manipulative, selfish behavior that had led to my downfall. It was as if nothing had changed, and that made my resolve even stronger. She had betrayed me once, but in this life, I would make sure she couldn't hide behind her lies. As I spent more time getting to know my new reality, I realized the power I now held. I had the knowledge of the past, and I was equipped with the wisdom of someone who had lived and died. No one in this life knew the darkness I carried within, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the pieces began to fall into place. And when they did, when my best friend finally realized who I truly was, she would understand that I had returned for a purpose. The memories of my previous life, my death, and the pain I endured were no longer shackles. They had become my armor. The revenge I sought was not just for me. It was for every woman who had ever been betrayed, for every person who had suffered because of someone else's cruelty. I was no longer a victim. I was the one in control. And I would make her and everyone else who had wronged me understand the cost of betrayal. As the days passed in this new life, I quietly observed everyone around me, carefully assessing the situation. I wasn't foolish enough to act impulsively. This time I would take my time, play the game as it needed to be played, and make sure my every move was calculated. The anger that had burned inside me since my death simmered beneath the surface, but I knew I couldn't let it cloud my judgment. I needed to be patient. My best friend, now just as clueless as I had once been, would soon come to realize that I wasn't the person she thought I was. It took all of my restraint not to confront her immediately. I watched her every move, saw her interact with the people around her. It wasn't hard to see how much she had changed. Yet there were glimpses of the girl I had once called my best friend. But those memories only fueled my desire for revenge. I had trusted her with my life, and now she had to pay for the destruction she had caused. I began to build a new life, a life that was separate from the one I had known before. I made sure to cultivate new relationships, appearing to be just another innocent, friendly person, while beneath it all, I was carefully constructing the web of revenge I would soon weave. Henry, the man who had been there in my past life, was here in this one too, but our relationship had never been the same. I couldn't allow myself to become too close to anyone, not until I had settled the score with her. Trusting people again was out of the question. The only person I could rely on was myself. I had to be strategic. Every interaction with her, every conversation had to be planned. I began to slowly reinsert myself into her life, as though I were just another person trying to reconnect. But in truth, I was watching her every move, studying her behavior and weaknesses. I needed to know exactly where to strike. I needed to find the point where her guard would drop, where her guilt would surface, and where I could finally make her face the consequences of her actions. I didn't know how long it would take, but I was willing to wait. I wasn't in a hurry. I had already lost everything once. This time I would make sure it was her that lost it all. One evening I watched her with a group of friends, laughing, talking, living the life I had once dreamed of. The anger swelled inside me again, but I forced it down. This wasn't about the anger. It was about making her realize that she had destroyed someone who had trusted her completely. It was about making her feel the weight of what she had done, making her wish she could undo the past. But this time I wasn't going to be a passive observer of my own suffering. This time I was in control. Slowly I began to manipulate situations. I made her trust me again, just as I had in the past, but it was all part of my plan. I carefully planted seeds of doubt in her mind, ensuring that she would begin to question her own actions. I didn't want her to see me as a threat just yet. I needed her to believe I had forgotten, that I had moved on. Only when she least expected it would I strike. But even as I took these steps, the guilt inside me gnawed at my conscience. Was this really what I wanted? To ruin her the way she had ruined me? Was revenge truly the path to my healing? Every time I looked into her eyes, I saw the girl who had once been my friend, the girl I had shared my dreams with. And in those moments I wondered if I was making a mistake. But each time that doubt crept in, I reminded myself of what she had done to me, and the fire inside me burned brighter. I knew there was no turning back now. I had already set everything in motion. And when the time came, I would make sure she knew what it meant to betray me. The groundwork was done. All that was left now was to wait for the right moment to reveal the truth, and to make her pay for what she had taken from me. The day of the confrontation arrived sooner than I had anticipated, and as I stood across from her, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, disbelief, and something else I wasn't prepared for: sorrow. She looked exactly the same as she had in our previous life. That familiar warmth in her eyes, that same smile I had once thought was genuine. It was like nothing had changed between us, even though everything had. The years of betrayal, the suffering, and my death had already shaped me into someone entirely different, and yet here she was, still unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. I had kept my distance for months, pretending to rebuild the connection we once shared. I played the part of the forgiving friend, the person who had let go of the past. I watched her every move, listened to her laugh, and pretended that I could still be the person I once was. But deep down I knew I was only biding my time, waiting for the right moment to make her pay. And now, standing in front of her, I realized that moment had finally come. "Hey Tina," she greeted me with that same friendly tone, the one that had once made me feel safe. "It's been so long. I'm glad we could finally catch up." Her words were laced with the same warmth, the same innocence she had always worn like armor. But I saw through it now. I saw the guilt hidden beneath her smile, the cracks in the facade she had so carefully built around herself. She didn't know it yet, but the veil was about to be lifted. The truth was about to come crashing down. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the anger I felt inside. "About everything that happened between us. The way things ended. The way you left me to die." Her expression faltered for the briefest moment, but it was enough for me to notice. The guilt was there, unmistakable. It was the crack I had been waiting for, the moment I had been preparing for. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off before she could say a word. "You never thought I would remember, did you?" I continued, each word deliberate, each one digging deeper into the wound she had created. "You thought you could get away with it, that I would just forget everything you did to me. But I remember it all, and I came back for one thing: revenge." Her face paled, and for the first time in our years of friendship, I saw fear in her eyes. She took a step back, as if trying to distance herself from the truth I was laying bare. But there was nowhere for her to run. "Not this time. What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to regain control of the situation, but her voice trembled. "Tina, you don't," I interrupted, my voice hard, steady. "Don't act like you don't know. You let your friends destroy me. You let them do it, and you stood there doing nothing. You watched as they tore me apart, and you didn't care. You let it happen, and you let me die." The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog, suffocating us both. I could see the sweat forming on her brow, the nervous twitch of her fingers as she fumbled for something to say. But there was nothing she could say. The truth was too powerful. "You're wrong," she finally whispered, though the conviction in her voice was weak, hollow. "I didn't let it happen. I never wanted you to. Stop lying," I snapped, stepping closer, forcing her to face me. "You betrayed me. You let them hurt me. And now you'll pay for it." Her face crumpled with the weight of her guilt, but she still refused to admit it. She didn't want to face what she had done. The walls she had built up around herself were crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking as tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know. I was scared." You were scared?" I asked, my tone biting, mocking. "You were scared? And that's why you let them do it? You didn't even try to stop them. You didn't even try to help me." The tears rolled down her cheeks, but they did nothing to change what had happened. They were just a feeble attempt at redemption that I wasn't willing to accept. "I should have stopped them," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "I should have protected you." But I wasn't listening to her apologies. I wasn't listening to her excuses. The time for forgiveness was long gone. The girl I had once called my best friend was no longer the person I had once loved. She was just another person who had hurt me, and now she was going to face the consequences. "You can't undo what's been done," I said, my voice cold and final. "But I can make you understand what it means to betray someone, to take away their life, their future. I will make you feel the pain you caused me." I turned to walk away, leaving her standing there, a broken shell of the person she had once been. But as I stepped out of the room, I knew that this confrontation was only the beginning. The battle for my revenge had only just started, and I would make sure she paid for everything. She would never escape what she had done to me. Not this time. The confrontation had left me with a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. I had finally said the words that had been festering inside me for years, but I knew it wasn't enough. I had exposed the truth, but I hadn't broken her completely. Not yet. The regret in her eyes, the guilt, it was a start, but it wasn't the end. She needed to feel the full weight of her actions, the weight of her betrayal. And for that, I needed to go deeper, to make her pay in ways she could never have anticipated. The next few days I kept my distance, watching her every move from afar, studying her like a predator observing its prey. I could feel her guilt gnawing at her, but it wasn't enough. Guilt alone wouldn't make her understand the depth of the pain she had caused. She needed to be manipulated, to be made to realize that everything she had built, everything she thought she had, was in jeopardy. And that's where I came in. I began to subtly manipulate the situation, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. She trusted me, or at least she thought she did, and I would use that trust to dismantle her life piece by piece. I started by feeding her little lies, things that seemed harmless but would slowly chip away at her confidence. The stories of people talking behind her back, of things not being as perfect as she believed, of her relationship starting to crack under the pressure. Nothing too dramatic, but enough to make her feel paranoid, to make her second-guess everything. I knew it would take time, but time was something I had plenty of. She thought she had all the power, but it was only a matter of time before she realized that I was the one in control now. Every conversation, every interaction was carefully orchestrated. I played the role of the concerned friend, the one who listened to her troubles, the one who offered advice, all while subtly pulling the strings that would unravel her world. The more I watched her, the more I saw the cracks appearing. Her confidence began to falter, the facade she had worked so hard to maintain slipping away little by little. And each time I saw that hint of doubt in her eyes, I felt a surge of satisfaction. She was beginning to unravel, and it was all because of the plan I had set into motion. But this wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to make her feel completely powerless, to take away the one thing she held most dear, her reputation. It was the thing that had always protected her. The thing that made people see her as the perfect, untouchable friend. If I could expose her for the fraud she truly was, if I could make everyone see the real her, I would have her completely in my grip. She would have nowhere to hide. So I waited for the perfect moment. The moments when she let her guard down, when she trusted me enough to confide in me, to share her secrets. I gathered every bit of information I could, everything that would ruin her life if it came to light. Every lie she told, every secret she kept, every cruel thing she had done. Everything was fair game. One evening I met her for coffee, just the two of us in the quiet corner of the cafe. She seemed distracted, her mind clearly elsewhere. It was the perfect opportunity. As I listened to her talk about her latest problems, I planted a subtle comment, a small suggestion that she should keep an eye on certain people, that maybe she wasn't as well liked as she thought. It was a harmless remark, but I could see the shift in her demeanor. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment, she hesitated before continuing the conversation. "Do you really think that?" she asked, her voice unsure. I nodded, maintaining the illusion of concern. "I don't know. I just think you might be a little too trusting of some people. Not everyone has your best interests at heart. You know." The seed was planted, and I watched it take root in her mind. I saw the way she pulled back, the way her thoughts began to spiral. She couldn't shake it off, not completely. The idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as safe as she thought, that her life wasn't as perfect as it appeared. It was exactly what I wanted. Now I just needed to continue feeding her doubts until she couldn't tell what was real, and what was just my manipulation. And it worked. Over the next few weeks, I began to see her become increasingly paranoid, more withdrawn, less confident. She started second-guessing her friendships, pulling away from people she once trusted, and in doing so, she isolated herself. She had begun to destroy her own life, and I was just watching it all unfold. But as much as I reveled in her unraveling, I knew that this was only the beginning. She needed more than just mental anguish. She needed to lose everything. Her reputation, her friends, her social standing. All of it had to crumble before her eyes. It wasn't just about making her feel guilty. It was about destroying everything that made her feel untouchable. And I would do whatever it took to make sure that she would never forget the price of betraying me. The pieces were falling into place. I had her exactly where I wanted her. And soon enough, she would realize that there was no escape. The last layer of her perfect life would soon be peeled away. And then she would finally understand the true cost of her betrayal. The first cracks in her life had already started to show, and now it was time to tighten the grip. I had patiently manipulated her into a corner, feeding her doubts and insecurities until she had started to unravel. Now I had to make sure there was no escape for her. My plan was progressing smoothly, and I could see her beginning to lose control. She had started to withdraw, growing more isolated from her friends, and I knew the walls were closing in around her. It was only a matter of time before she realized that everything she had built, everything she thought was stable, was slipping through her fingers. The next phase of my plan was crucial. I had already set the stage. Now I needed to push her further into the abyss. I knew her weaknesses now, her need for validation, her fear of losing her social standing. The more I played on those weaknesses, the more I could manipulate her actions. Every move I made was carefully thought out. Every word I said designed to push her closer to the breaking point. I started with her inner circle. I reached out to her closest friends, planting seeds of doubt, twisting their words and actions so that she began to question who was truly on her side. It wasn't hard. She was already paranoid and mistrustful. All I had to do was subtly influence their behavior, and she would do the rest. I made sure they questioned her, made her feel like an outsider, like she was no longer part of the group. Slowly, I began to see her become more distant, her confidence faltering with every passing day. She stopped trusting anyone, even the people who had once been her closest confidants. They didn't know it yet, but I was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I continued to gain leverage over her. I had gathered more information than she could ever imagine. Secrets about her family, her finances, and even her past mistakes. Everything she had tried to bury was now at my fingertips, and I was ready to use it. I began planting rumors, whispering about her indiscretions to the right people, ensuring that they would find their way back to her. Her reputation, the one thing she had always prided herself on, was starting to crack. The whispers began to spread, and I watched as her perfect life slowly turned into a house of cards, one piece at a time. It wasn't just about the rumors, though. It was about how she would react to them. I wanted to see how far I could push her before she broke, how much I could twist the knife before she truly realized the extent of my revenge. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to know that she was responsible for everything that was happening to her. And every time she tried to fight back, every time she attempted to hold on to her life, I tightened my grip just a little more. I watched from the sidelines, carefully observing her every move. She was starting to crack under the pressure, but there was still more to be done. Her desperation was beginning to show. I could see it in her eyes when she spoke, the way she avoided certain people, the way she walked around with her head down, as if she were trying to hide from something or someone. But there was no escaping me now. She was in my web, and it was only a matter of time before she would be completely ensnared. The final pieces of my plan were in place. I had her right where I wanted her, and soon everything would come crashing down around her. She would have no one left to turn to, no place to hide. I had set the stage for the grand finale, and I could already taste the sweet satisfaction of seeing her finally realize what she had done. The revenge I had longed for was within my grasp, and as I watched her struggle, I knew that it was only a matter of time before she would face the consequences of her betrayal. The time had come. The web I had so carefully woven around her had tightened, and there was no way out. I could feel the final moments of my revenge approaching, the anticipation building within me. My heart raced as I watched her. This time I wouldn't let her escape the consequences of what she had done to me. She had been my best friend, someone I had trusted with my very life, and she had destroyed me. Now it was her turn to face the fallout, and I would make sure it was as devastating as the pain she had caused me. The betrayal still stung, but now I wore it as armor. It no longer made me weak. It fueled me. Every step I had taken, every move I had made had led to this moment. She was no longer the confident, untouchable person she once was. I had made sure of that. Her life, the perfect world she had so carefully built, was starting to crumble. And now it was time for me to deliver the final blow. I arranged to meet her at the same cafe where we had once laughed and shared our secrets, the place where our friendship had begun. The memories of our past friendship flooded my mind, but I pushed them aside. There was no room for nostalgia, no room for the person I had once been. I had come here to destroy her, to show her the cost of her betrayal. As I walked into the cafe, I could see her sitting at a table, looking uncertain, a nervousness in her posture that hadn't been there before. She looked around, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone to come in and reassure her. But no one would. Not today. She saw me and gave a half-hearted smile, the same smile that used to warm my heart. But today it only fueled my anger. I walked over to her, sitting down without saying a word. The silence between us was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me with a mix of guilt and confusion. "Tina, what's going on? Why did you want to meet here?" she asked, her voice tentative, unsure. I studied her. The same girl who had betrayed me without a second thought. The same girl who had stood by while others took everything from me. The same girl who had let me die. "You don't know, do you?" I replied coldly. "You don't know what it feels like to have your life stolen from you by someone you trusted." Her face twitched with confusion, but I could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. She was starting to realize that this wasn't just a conversation between old friends, it was a reckoning. A moment of truth that she could no longer escape. "I don't understand, Tina. Please just talk to me. We can fix this." She trailed off, her voice cracking, and for a moment I saw the panic in her eyes. She was terrified, and she should be. She had done nothing to earn forgiveness, and she was about to learn just how far I would go to make her understand the pain she had caused. "There's nothing to fix," I said, my voice low but firm. "You're not the same person I thought you were. You're not my best friend anymore. You're just the woman who let her friends destroy me, who stood by and did nothing while I suffered." Her face went pale, her lips trembling as she stammered. "Tina, please. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know what to do. I was." "Stop," I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "I don't need your excuses. I don't need your apologies. You didn't care about me then, and you don't care about me now. You only care about saving yourself." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "You had a choice. You could have stopped it. You could have saved me. But you didn't. You let me die. And now you'll pay for it." Her face crumpled with the weight of my words, her eyes welling with tears. "I was scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know what to do, Tina. They threatened me, and I. Don't you dare blame them." I snapped, my voice sharp and full of venom. "You had a choice. You could have said no. You could have saved me, but you didn't. And now it's too late." I stood up, taking one final look at her broken form. I could see the guilt eating away at her, the realization of what she had done sinking in. But it was too late for apologies. Too late for regret. I had already made her pay in ways she could never have imagined. The damage was done. She had been my best friend, and she had betrayed me in the worst way possible. With one last chilling look, I turned and walked away. The final step had been taken. Her life, once so secure, would never be the same again. She had lost everything. And as for me, I had finally taken back what was mine, my power, my life, and my revenge. It was over. The aftermath of everything that had unfolded was strangely quiet, almost surreal. The final act of revenge had been completed, but the satisfaction I had anticipated was slow to come. It was not the triumphant victory I had imagined. It was more like a weight being lifted, a release from the anger and bitterness that had driven me for so long. I had spent so much time plotting and preparing, so much energy consumed by my need to make her feel the consequences of her betrayal. But now that it was done, I found myself standing at the precipice, looking at the ruins of the life I had once wanted, and the new life I had created in its place. My former best friend's life, once so perfect in her own eyes, had unraveled completely. The truths I had exposed about her, the manipulations I had set in motion, had destroyed her social standing, her reputation, and any trust she had left from her friends. She was no longer the untouchable girl I had once idolized. She was broken, alone, and haunted by the realization of her own guilt. It was painful to watch, but it was necessary. She had to feel the weight of her actions just as I had felt it when I died. And yet, even with her downfall, I didn't feel the complete closure I had expected. The void left by the betrayal was still there. A cold, empty space inside me. Revenge had given me power, but it hadn't healed the wounds I had carried for so long. I realized then that revenge, as sweet as it had seemed, couldn't undo the past. It couldn't bring back what I had lost, but it had been a step forward. A necessary one. I had confronted the darkness, confronted the one person who had destroyed me, and I had come out stronger. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself, not just for survival but for empowerment. I had rewritten the narrative of my life, reclaiming what was mine. And in doing so, I had learned the power of self-reliance and independence. As the days passed, I began to rebuild piece by piece. I focused on the things that mattered most, my future, my well-being, and the relationships I still valued. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared, those who understood the value of loyalty and trust. Henry, who had been a constant in my life, stood by me through everything, offering quiet support when I needed it most. His belief in me, his unwavering presence, was something I had come to rely on. And it was in these moments of calm that I finally began to understand what it meant to move on. The path ahead wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt. The scars of the past would never fully disappear, and the ghosts of betrayal still lingered at the edges of my mind. But they no longer had power over me. I had faced them head-on, and in doing so, I had found the strength to let them go. My life, once dictated by the whims and manipulations of others, was now in my hands. I could make choices without fear, without guilt. I could live for myself and no one else. And that, more than anything, was the greatest victory I could have ever hoped for. I had taken back what was mine. Not just revenge, but control of my own destiny. And now I was free. Free to live, to love, and to create a future that was completely mine. For the first time in both lives, I was finally whole.